Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered, your weekly dose of cricket podcasting action. I am your host, Menas. We are into our 12th season of broadcasting. Can you believe that? The podcast started in 2013, so we're now into season 12. There's a lot of other podcasts that claim to be, we've done 25 seasons. They count every season, the English season, the Aussie season, the Indian season. So if I counted all the seasons, we're at about 100 seasons by now, but I'm just going to go by years. So we're in our 12th season. No fudging the figures on this show. Yes, I got you. Final word. Now, joining me tonight, we have Daniel Beswick, who last show was absolutely pumping the tires of Mongolia's entry into international cricket. They were bowled out for 10 in one of their games. So Daniel comes with his tail between his legs. Welcome back.
They just, lost a bad toss, unfortunately, on that particular occasion. And, couldn't quite pull it back. But it was good to see them competing in sub-regional qualifying on the road to India and Sri Lanka T20 World Cup 2026. Yeah, didn't get a point on the board, unfortunately. But they had
lucky to get a run.
Tournament. The best kits of the tournament. Some of the best kits in the world, actually. So
you stick to it.
It's all about moral victories. Moral victories, man. As we know all about
Take what you can.
Yeah.
And the other panelist tonight is a sports broadcaster, Damian Watson, who didn't make any wild claims last week. Damian, how are you?
I'm feeling as well as Q8 did when they beat Mongolia, 8 for 210. I'm looking at some of these fixtures, very, very fascinating. I always enjoy, as you know, some of the minnows. So I encourage it, even if they do get bowled out for 10 minutes. And I tell you what, good week for English haters, as I said to you off air. I'm sure you're in a good mood.
I'm in a great. Well, actually, I was in a really good mood, and we're going to get to all the news. Australia played in Scotland. England got beaten. They've appointed Baz as their coach, and we're going to talk about all that. But just before I jumped on this recording, I was listening to Gideon Hay and Pete Lawler's podcast, and they had esteemed journalist Mike Coward on. And they were waxing lyrical about Peter Roebuck's legacy to cricket journalism in this country. And they were pumping his tires, talking about how he did work in Africa, getting education to young men in Africa. And that's all fine, but it annoyed the shit out of me that those idiots did not mention the fact that he has been accused of sexual assault in Africa, in Australia, on some of these young men. Now, it's a complicated legacy with Peter Roebuck. I understand that he did some great things in cricket journalism, but he also has some very questionable actions. They are well documented. And I'm sorry, Pete, Gideon, Mike, if you're going to talk about Roebuck and you're not going to bring those things up, then you are not doing your job. And it really hits home because the guy that started this podcast with me was assaulted by Peter Roebuck. He taught at my school. He also, I've got good knowledge of the situation. Those things have all been reported, and it just annoyed the shit out of me. I can see both sides of the coin. He was a very good writer. He was a very good broadcaster, but he also did some things that are regrettable, and he used his power over these young men in Africa to take advantage of them. So I just thought it was flat out negligent of those three journalists not to mention it. Do you guys know anything about the Roebuck story, or was it before your time?
No, I've heard of the circumstances surrounding his death. I remember that I was in year 11 at the time. I reckon it was around 2011. And wasn't he, again, I don't know 100% the circumstances, but I heard about the fact that wasn't he up for questioning, and that's when, I guess, his death happened.
Absolutely, yes. I think it was Zimbabwe and South Africa, there were accusations.
The South African documented. Wasn't it after the Australians got bowled out for 47 and the test match ended in 3 days, and it happened off the back of that?
Yeah, he jumped out a window. But, the crux of it is Tim Lane reported it and wrote about it, that, he took advantage of these young men. the people that know Peter Roebuck say that he was, repressed his sexuality. That's fine, but that doesn't give you an excuse to do that. I'm sorry. And, it happened close to home. He was a teacher at my school in Sydney. He was creepy as fuck. I can tell you that. He just had something about him. And I know people that lived with him. And look, I just got annoyed that these three journalists are talking about his legacy to Australian cricket journalism and didn't mention the fact that there's a huge question mark over his character. And cowards like, Roebuck did all this great stuff in Africa. Yes, and then he took advantage of these young men. There's stories of him in Tim Lane's book. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the sordid details of what he did, but it's just negligent.
Without going into too many details, were there suspicions back then, Menas, in your experience? You said he taught at your school. I know you said that you found him to be creepy. Were there suspicions and was there talk around that time about his conduct and his character even back then?
Absolutely. So he, and it's well reported, the guy I started the podcast with, he took him into a room and took his pants down and started whacking him on his bare bum and then went and visited this student in his dorm room at the boarding house. And it was just, you have to read the report. I don't want to take words out of, but if you Google James McSmith and Peter Roebuck, it's all written up. I mean, and as soon as a new headmaster took over at my school, he moved him on. Like he was a weird guy, had weird sexual stuff going on, and he was, boarding house master. Need I say more? It's a bad situation. Tim Lane wrote a very good book about it. There's a lot of reports about it. And yeah, I was just annoyed that these guys are talking on this podcast about him and didn't tell the full story, like whitewashing history and, three white guys not talking about a white man assaulting young black men in Africa. It just got my blood boiling.
Were they very close? Like, again, I'm not really familiar with the press pack. Were they very close, I'm presuming, Gideon and...
Well, Mike and Peter were.
Okay.
Mike and Peter Roebuck were. And Jim Maxwell and lots of other people were close to Roebuck. And he has a complicated legacy. I get that. It's not black and white. But
I think Jim mentioned in his book, didn't he? He didn't go into details, but I'm sure he mentioned that at least there was a question surrounding his character in his book.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So he's certainly been an influence on me with his acerbic opinions, and I like the way he distanced himself from the team. But a lot of question marks over his character. If you read Ian Botham's book, he talks about it as well. He talks about his dealings with Peter Roebuck when they were at Somerset. So anyway, look, just wanted to get that off my chest because I know a lot of listeners to this podcast also listen to Gideon and Pete's podcast. So I think you deserve to know the full story. And if you want to, read more, just Google Peter Roebuck, Google James McSmith, get Tim Lane's book. But that is the truth. That is, we're not going to ignore it on this podcast. It's called Cricket Unfiltered for a reason.
Well,
all right.
Yeah, I think just from my point of view, it should at least be brought up that there were question marks surrounding his character. You can't look at one side as a journalist. Even, I don't know. Does it depend on? I suppose it's complicated because he died before the whole thing fully came.
Well, it's actually less complicated because there's no defamation issue, so you can say what you like about him. It'll be more complicated if he was alive. Anyway, let's get into the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcasts. And since our last episode, there's been a full series against Scotland. Australia won 3-0. It was a terrific passage of 3 games. Just to go through the highlights, in the first game, Scotland made 9 for 154, Australia 3 for 156 in just 9.4 overs. Travis Head hit 80 off 25 balls. Australia hit a world record 1 for 113 after 6 overs. Head equaled the fastest 50 for Australia in T20 cricket of just 17 balls. And there was a sequence of 12 balls that went 6, 6, 4, 6, 4, 4, 4, 6, 4, 4, 4, 4. It was an absolute pasting. Daniel, that was Head and Mitch Marsh at their supreme best.
Yeah, last where you talked about having my tail between my legs on the Mongolia chat. I'd probably have the same situation here with Scotland and talking them up. I thought, they had something to prove after coming so close to beating them at the T20 World Cup last year. And I've got to say, especially in this first game, they were missing Michael Jones and Brad Curry, but there were probably... I don't think there was an answer to what Travis Head came up with and what he conjured up in that particular game, just in a sort of a world of his own when he's at his best, to be perfectly honest. I think no one in the world can stop that man, let alone at the Grange on a postage stamp of the ground. So got to say, like, from an Australian point of view, a lot of boxes ticked in this particular series. The youngsters getting a hit out with the ball as well. And on the most part, the batting was imposing and strong, and we knew that this was going to be a tour of not a rebuild with the not in inverted commas. But look, there's positive signs for the future. I know people will look at the opposition, but Scotland aren't a bad opposition anymore in 2024. They're one of the better sort of shorter format teams around the circuit, even in, or especially in their home conditions. So yeah, a lot of boxes ticked, and the Australians will go south of the border to England and look to do the same again. I think it's an exciting time to see a few new faces running around in Australian colours and ultimately doing a pretty good job.
Damian, Head was fired up by Scotland saying they wanted to, I don't know, get blood on get some blood against the out for blood. Yeah, that was the. But Travis Head inflicted the most carnage. I mean, that was embarrassing, conceding 154 in 9.4 overs.
Yeah, that's right. It was almost effectively, it's like playing cricket in the backyard. That's what it looked like, didn't it? With the way he just belted them around. And how about Josh Inglis as well? He scored 100 off 43 deliveries. I thought he really established what he's capable of as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In the second game, Australia played in foggy conditions. I mean, Scott and the hill, you had fog over the Grange. It was certainly very foreign conditions to what Australia would get in Sydney, that's for sure, and in Australia. And you're right, Josh Inglis, Australia made 4 for 196. Inglis, 100 off just 43 balls. It's the fastest T20 century for Australia, beat his own record. And in Scotland's reply, Stoinis took 4 for 23, but another convincing win. And you mentioned Inglis, Damian. That was just a terrific innings. His second T20 century. He made one against India after the 50-over World Cup last year. And I think we're really going to see him make that spot his own now that he's taken it from Matthew Wade. And I think I said recently that maybe it was a World Cup too late. Maybe we needed Inglis in the last T20 World Cup.
Yeah, these things are always good in hindsight, though. But
I love Wade.
No, I think there's further scope for improvement. I know you mentioned, I was reading through your rundown before, asking the question as to whether he could be the next Adam Gilchrist. I think I don't know if he'll be as dynamic as Gilly because there's still a long way to go. But having said that, Gilly started slowly when he was first thrusted into the Australian scene. I think people forget that, not necessarily at test level.
He was in the shadow. He was in the shadow of Ian Healy. It wasn't so much.
Right. He used to get booed. Cope with more pressure, to be honest with you. I think
a bit like Inglis has been in the shadow of Payne and then Carey.
Yeah, but it took Gilly a while to find his feet. I remember in limited overs format, different at test level. He seemed to adapt pretty quickly, and he never really shied away from his natural game. It's hard to make a comparison to a legend like Gilly, but look, I think there's scope for improvement still for him, and I think he can be a very dynamic player. I'm not sure if he'll ever be as good as Gilly, but I like the way he approaches it, the fact that he maintains his natural game.
I was just going to say, I think what I really think about Inglis is, are we sort of keeping this great talent off on the bench when he should be in our test side? So you can he's not, maybe he's not going to be as good as Gilchrist, but he is that player that can win a game in a session, can take a game away. Alex Carey is a fantastic player, but he is not that player. And we have this Inglis who is showing this special talent. And I wonder if at some stage, the selector's going to have to make a really tough call and go, Carey is very bloody good, but Inglis is very bloody better, and we need to get him in there. I mean, that's the tough choice. And I think about what you were saying, Damian, you know, Gilchrist was kept on the sideline towards the end of Ian Healy's career. And although, you know, Healy was a fantastic wicketkeeper, as soon as Gilchrist came into that test side, he made an impression. He changed that test side. And I guess, Daniel, I wonder where you sit on this. You know, could Inglis be that firecracker number 7 that really makes the difference in test cricket? The one that you get Australia 5 down and this guy can score 100 in a session.
I was just looking at Alex Carey's last test knocks. Of course, he had that 98
not out.
Against New Zealand in Christchurch. But before that, and this is going from most recent to, further back, 14-3, 10-2, and then 65, and then scores of 15, 38, and 53. To be honest, I've never really pictured Josh Inglis in whites. And I think that's just because I think that team's been so successful, and Alex Carey with the gloves in Test cricket has probably come along a little bit better than maybe some people thought, maybe 2 or 3 years back. I remember in that World Test Championship final, he was quite good with the gloves as well. But it's definitely worth the question. It'd be an interesting hypothetical should Alex Carey go down. I mean, you don't want to see him get injured, but if he was to break down and, you know, he was to miss part of the Test summer, what Australia would do in hindsight. But then it's a case of workload as well. You know, what do they want to realistically give to Gloveman? Would assume that they've both got Cricket Australia central contracts as well. So in terms of how the workload is, what the plan would be. I mean, I'd love to see Josh Inglis in red ball cricket. I don't know his Shield record off the top of my head, what he's like.
Well, I'll tell you. Look, Daniel, let me jump in then. Because I've got them both up here and they are remarkably similar. Alex Carey, 83 first-class games, averaging 34, 600s, 25 50s, strike rate of 60. Josh Inglis, this is where we get a bit very similar. 55 games for Inglis, so less cricket. Average of 34 as well. 5 centuries, so one less, but a lot less games, 12 half centuries, strike rate in the mid-60s as well. So very similar first-class records. And I guess, you know, if you're looking at what Inglis has done at international level, he's sparkled with 100 in India, sparkled 100 here. I said it's a tough choice, but, you know, he does provide a different option to Carey.
And a right-hander as well. In that batting order at the moment, you've got Khawaja, Head, anyone else? Previously David Warner, not anymore. So maybe in terms of matchups as well, it might be something to think about too. I'm just trying to think of looking ahead to say the Border Gavaskar series coming up. You know, if Ashwin was to come out here and take a bunch of wickets, he'd be a good matchup against someone like an Alex Carey. I don't know if that's
the other thing is
consideration.
The other thing is that Inglis is a very good player of spin. We're due to go to Sri Lanka next year for a tour. So anyway, look, that's my thought. Let's get on to game 3 in Scotland. So Australia win the series 2-0, a couple of world records, well, one world record with the 113 in 6 overs in the first game. That was just incredible. I thought I was saying things. It was midnight. And then in game 3, Australia, Scotland 3 for 149, Scotland 9 for 149, Green 3 for 35. In reply, Australia did it easy, 4 for 153. Green 62 not out was player of the match. Good finish to the series for Cameron Green, and you know he's only played a handful of T20 internationals for Australia, but I think the next 10 years of Cameron Green are going to be super fun to watch. Like, if you're a Green fan, get on the train now, because I reckon the next 10 years, he's just going to dominate international cricket. One of you take that.
I'm excited. There's no doubt. Yeah, I'm excited about what he's capable of, Daniel, because I suppose the question mark will be how well he handles his workload, and I think there's the support staff around him to do that, because, you know, with his build as well.
Yeah. Don't you think they've carefully managed him? They brought him into the test side, 4 years ago now.
Yep.
And they've, he's only played a handful of T20 internationals. Like, they didn't overburden him, and he's gone and played in the IPL and got other experiences. So I think, if he's ever going to be ready, it's now. He's 25. He's huge kid.
Yeah, I guess also the query is, you're right, he's reaching his prime, I guess, physically. It's just whether we've seen, with fast bowlers in particular in the past, and he's got the added workload of being, your genuine all-rounder. As we see a few of them break down, I guess, over time, particularly with that added workload. So as long as he has the right support, and I think everyone's confident he's got the right support around him, he can go for a long period of time. But you always have that in the back of your mind, I reckon, with his build. He's a tall guy, could have been an Australian rules footballer potentially. I know he had thoughts about that, but as long as they can manage his workload physically, he's got the sky's the limit.
I think too, his bowling action is not particularly robust or physical. It's a pretty easy action. It doesn't look like it puts too much or takes too much of a toll on his body as well. And yeah, when you are 2 meters tall and such an imposing figure, I think physically you've probably got so many advantages in international cricket, and he's got the technique to, I think, flourish across all 3 formats. I suppose, again, probably to bring the biggest question up in terms of the advent of franchise cricket in 2024 and beyond in the next 10 years is that, okay, how much money can CA realistically throw at him, along with the sponsorships and endorsements, for him to basically forego a lot of his career and not play so much T20 franchise cricket, because he's going to be playing potentially all 3 formats for Australia for the next 10 years. I mean, it's scary what his numbers could look like in 10 years' time when we're a little bit older and grayer, talking about it on Cricket Unfiltered, talking about him potentially being, I don't know, an ICC Hall of Fame cricketer with 5 global tournaments and 3 World Test Championships to his name. Like, that's the potential that is in front of us. And yeah, I think the bottom line is that, yeah, it's going to be enjoyable, as you say, Menners and Damo as well. Like, it's scary how good he can be.
Indeed. So that wraps up the series in Scotland. Australia leave victors 3-0. Looks like they had a great time. Lovely little ground. A lot of Scottish people in there.
Probably played a lot of golf as well.
Definitely.
Hell yeah.
All right, we're going to take our first break, and then we'll get into the preview of the White Ball series versus England. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menners. I'm with Daniel and Damian. And let's move to the series in England. Australia now have 3 T20s. And as we record this, we're recording this Wednesday night. So you're probably listening to this after the series has got going, because they're playing the first game later on tonight. And then after the 3 T20s, they play 5 ODIs in England. This series is a great excuse for English cricket to fill its bank account, and also for the English crowds to behave badly again. I don't think it'll be as badly as the Ashes, but I wonder if we'll get the Rolf Harris chance. I'm sure the Aussie players will get a ton of abuse, but we'll see. We'll see. No Joss Butler for these T20s with a calf injury. One interesting point for me is Jofra Archer is back for England, so love seeing him playing international cricket. Mitch Marsh spoke ahead of the series. He strongly hinted Josh Hazlewood going straight back into the 11 after missing the Scotland series. And he talked about Matt Short joining the squad after the birth of his child. I think you might see Matt Short in at the top of the order at some stage. They might rotate Fraser McGurk out. And yeah, just anything else you're excited about leading into the series, Damian?
Yeah, there's a couple of, I guess, question marks, I think, surrounding the team, in the sense that I think Mitch Marsh mentioned to the press that this isn't necessarily a team in transition, whereas I think England have been pretty open, haven't they? They've got 3 debutants, so they're going through a transitional phase. I think ultimately there's still an element of transition there, isn't there, for the Australians? You've still got a lot of young players coming through, Cooper Connolly, Jake Fraser McGurk. There was all that hype around him earlier in the calendar year, and I think, there's been talk in recent times, I know, on social media amongst journalists, cricket journalists, suggesting, maybe the hype was a little bit over the top and overzealous, given he's fronted back to earth a little bit. So, but he's still a young guy at the end of the day. So I would still persist with him. He's got the talent there. We know that. You're always going to get that with young players in any sport, just that lack of consistency in most cases. So I still think persist with him. And I guess the other question mark will be, you mentioned that, England crowds may be behaving badly, but will there be a heck of a lot of interest in this series? We're not building up to an Ashes series. We're not off the back of an Ashes series. And the English Premier League season is in full swing again. Is it going to get a lot of attention over there?
They've just come off a test series where they lost the last test as well. There's been a lot of talk about ticket prices in parts of the UK as well in terms of how expensive it is to watch the cricket. I can't foresee a raucous crowd per se.
It's an excuse to drink, Daniel. They love hitting the pints over there.
Well, yeah, but they want to spend their money on pints. They don't want to spend their money on tickets.
It's true.
That's the issue.
Watch it at the pub, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they'll get a few people in.
Yeah.
I think they'll get a few in. Everyone loves the rivalry between the two teams. But you're right. It's a weird series because there's no actual there's also no big white ball tournament on the horizon. There's the Champions Trophy next year, which is, that's probably the lowest ICC tournament there is. So it sort of just boils down to the fact that we don't like them, they don't like us. So there's just that innate rivalry, but the stakes aren't particularly high. I will say, though, that, when Australia went there after the sandpaper scandal, and didn't we get smacked 5-0? That was embarrassing, and we came back with our tail between our legs. So, there is always some pride on the line when playing England. So, if we can go there and smash them, we're playing 8 games. If we can win 6 of them, then that'll certainly knock them around leading into a new era under Brendan McCullum.
Yeah, I just wonder whether it's going to get a lot of attention even over there. I know, attendance one thing, but,
No, you're right. Tottenham's next game in the Premier League against Arsenal will get way more coverage in the papers than any one of these games.
Hell yeah.
It's not like that's a new thing, though.
No, I didn't say it was.
England, no, I agree. But I'm just saying England's wrestling with paywalled television and cricket has gone back, 20 years now, basically, and they've never really been able to find a solution. And they're just, from a high performance standpoint, they've just been so lucky that they've had so much participation over the years. They've still been relevant most of that time, outside of a couple of really bad series out here. Like, they've always been thereabouts. Now they're reinventing cricket. If you just ask them,
saving cricket.
Yeah, saving. Well, yeah, we can talk about that test match in a second.
And we'll get there. So now, keeping on with the Australians, Andrew McDonald was on SEN this week, Damian's employer, and he was talking to Gerard Whateley, and he said a few interesting things. The first thing he said, that each year in international cricket, they tend to prioritise a particular white ball format, and obviously now we're heading into the Champions Trophy. They're prioritising the 50-over format. So therefore, these tours are with an eye to that tournament. They still keep their eye on the ball with the T20 side, but they're definitely thinking about which players can fill certain roles in the 50-over game. And then he said he wasn't happy with the catching percentage of Australians in the last T20 World Cup, that it was only 71%. We spoke a lot about it on this show. And I wonder if that will mean they actually do a lot more catching practice now, what the result of that is, because no, you laugh, Daniel, but, a lot of training has been optional, and I understand there's a real need to keep players fresh and ready to perform on match days. But I don't think it's a coincidence that a couple of years after Justin Langer was thrown out of the team, we had 71% catching ratio at a World Cup. I mean, can you imagine if JL was the coach then? He'd be spitting chips.
He'd be doing fielding drills, everyone barefoot on the grass, out there.
He'd make them watch all the drop catches over and over again at the team hotel.
No bins were harmed, having been kicked over in the dressing room in the making of this podcast.
Damian, do you think you'll see the catching improve now? Do you think now that Mac has flagged it?
Oh, you would hope so. If it's a big focus, you'd like to see it out there on the field. I think it should happen anyway. You should always work on your fielding. I think it's a little bit undervalued in international cricket these days, to a certain degree. It's what separates the elite from, the half good. One thing I guess that I noticed in regards to Andrew McDonald, he wasn't necessarily committing to declaring Steve Smith to be the opener, the Australian Test batting order. So I do wonder how much. I mean, we're 10 weeks out from the first test in Perth. How much comes down to what happens in the Shield and things like that. But he wasn't very committal. I think he was even saying that's a question on everyone's lips. So it's interesting.
Yes.
But I suppose not surprising.
What interested me about those comments from McDonald was exactly right. He wasn't committal about Smith opening, but he was fairly committal about this being our top six. So these batters that we've got at the moment being our best 6 batters in the country. So what that would indicate is that someone's going to listen to me and they might rejig the order and put Travis Head up to open. That seemed to be more of an indication of where they were headed. Did you get that impression, Daniel?
Yeah, I think, and it kind of just led to another question in that, who would take that opening spot tomorrow if we had the choice? And I'd sit here thinking about it, and I'm not really convinced about any of them. And to the point where you might as well try Travis Head at the top of the order in the frame of mind that he's in and the form that he's in, and just to give Smith that chance to go back down and bat 4. I think I admired Steve Smith wanting to open the batting, and because I think that opening the batting is more a mindset than anything else. If you go out there wanting to open the batting and wanting to take on the challenge of the new ball and the new red ball that swings, I think it's almost half the battle won. So I admired what he was trying to do. I think, it's a combination of maybe him not being used to that spot and him maybe not being in the best nick of his life. But I think we talked about it with Joe Root on last week's show. These guys, him and Smith, have both been so good, even when the team's been 2 for not many anyway. Hence why Steve wanted to probably take on the new ball when he did. But yeah, maybe it's an experiment that didn't quite work out last year. And for him to go back down to 4 and Travis Head opening, I don't think anyone would really have any qualms with that.
McDonald did seem to indicate, he made a comment about Cummins having an influence on this decision, and of course he's the skipper. So I wonder what Cummins wants. And there seemed to be a feeling that he wants Smith back in the middle order. And Cummins and Travis Head are great mates. So if Cummins were to sort of sidle up to Travis and say, look, I know you don't want to open, but this is what the team needs. I believe in you. You can be the next David Warner. You can be the next left-handed Verinder Sehwag. You can do it at the top of the order. Then maybe we get some magic out of Head. But the doomsdays will tell you, and it happens. Head is a little bit hit or bust when he opens in white ball cricket. He can get done early with a bit of swing. So, he will be exposed to a new ball with the best bowlers fresh going at him. So does that diminish his value at 5? Does it diminish his value too much? I don't know, but I think we're going to see it happen.
I don't think it would diminish his value massively, but it's interesting. The other thing that you take away potentially from those comments, you mentioned, Men, is that he's probably indicating based on his language that is the top 6 that we have. Does that mean he doesn't really have a lot? Well, I won't say a lot of faith, because there's always room at the bottom level or at Shield level for someone to come through. But is he not noticing a lot coming through, banging down the door?
Oh, I don't think it's that. I just think it's more the players they have. I mean, obviously you got Khawaja, Marnus and Smith, all with impeccable test records. You've got Cameron Green, who has to play because of his bowling. And then you've got the Bison, Mitch Marsh, who they all love. He's a glue guy. He's a team spirit guy. He's the dressing room guy. So I think it's more an indication of wanting to keep that nucleus together rather than looking at the others in a poor light.
Would that deflate some of with some of them hearing those comments? Would that deflate them coming into the Shield season or not?
Don't think Marcus Harris would be feeling too great right now.
Yeah.
Or Cameron Bancroft.
Or Matt Renshaw.
Yeah. Matt Renshaw, probably the one difference that he has to the other two is he plays a lot of innings in the middle order for Queensland. Therefore, I think they feel they can sort of stick him wherever they need. All right, moving on. Last comment from Andrew McDonald is he did indicate that a lot of the test players for Australia that will feature in the Border Gavaskar Trophy will miss the preceding white ball games against Pakistan. They'll be left to play Shield cricket and prepare for the big 5 tests against India. So we could see a lot of really young, exciting players in that home white ball series against Pakistan. All right. Let's stay in Australia because a really interesting article popped up by Brendan Julian. Sorry, an article in the News Corp papers, and Brendan Julian was interviewed in that. And he made a comment that he's been contacted by current players who've been upset at what Brendan Julian said in the media. And actually, I heard Tim Payne on his radio show say something similar recently, that since he's been doing commentary on the radio, he's got bad, people. He's pissed off people within the Australian team. And Tim Payne only retired a few years ago, so they're both talking about blowback from this current team. And in this article, they quote Adam Zampa, who spoke on the Adam Collins, Jeff Lemon podcast, and Zampa said about ex-players talking about him, just be thoughtful and actually try and help and understand what it's like to be a professional cricketer. You effing did it already, so why are you being such a fuckwit about it? And Brendan Julian responded, and I've been texted by players that are playing saying, mate, I can't believe you said that. And I said, but what about the 15 things where I said how good what you did was? I mean, seriously. And I think this is a bad look from the current Australian playing group, that they're so sensitive to comments by ex-players. This is the way it works. You're a professional sportsman. You make a lot of money. A lot of that money is because of the media attention you get. So you just got to take the good with the bad. Who wants to jump in?
Can I just acknowledge first that Men has censored one F-bomb without censoring the other? I thought that was quite I think I
swore at the top of the show anyway.
Yeah. I've thought a bit about this over the last 2 days, and I've kind of flip-flopped on what I sort of think about it. I don't think either of them are sort of bang on correct with how they've assessed it. But in saying that, I think it's just more things are being inflated by them being thrown in their own situations and then kind of defending their own ground. I don't think the problem is probably as big as either side sort of thinks it is. But what I will say is that if I was to look on the players' side, first of all, I would acknowledge that, and this is a little bit before my time, but the Australian players of the 1990s, anecdotally, were very hard to interview and access from a media point of view. I don't know, Manners, if you had any sort of any anecdote in regards to that, but the general consensus is that they were really hard to get in contact with. They were largely untouchable, largely inaccessible. And then we saw that wave of a lot of those players actually going on and having quite successful media careers after that.
Well, let me just put you up on that. So it was a different landscape then. So what I've heard anecdotally is that actually the players were a lot more available, but it was in a different context. Now we are given these sterile press conferences. They share, they've got their social media accounts. You see what they're doing all the time. But in the 90s, like you're talking about, it was Crash, Con, all these reporters, Mike Coward at the pub with these guys. And Craddock tells these stories of just being on tour and Steve was saying, come up to my room, let's have a chat. So it was a different type of access now. But I will say, in broadly, what you're saying about that is they were the media was different then. There was no social media. So it was very much classical media, and they were a bit standoffish in the way that they, now like Cummins, everyone has their own channel and their own image, whereas the players in the 90s didn't have that, but the access was different.
Yeah. Okay. So I look to Zampa's perspective, and I can kind of see where he's coming from. I think, having been around the traps and been at, say, BBL fixtures and international grounds, you see the commentators mingling with the players a lot, especially post-COVID now. So outside of one or two people, I think these comments were probably directed at certain individuals, so almost like a subtweeting kind of thing. But what I would also say, going back to sort of the media side of things, is that again, to look at, say, the Australia team of the 90s and early 2000s, the current team has won a T20 World Cup, a Cricket World Cup, and a World Test Championship in the space of the last 3 years. If we were to assess how they've gone in T20 World Cups, I think it's a little bit different because it's a bit fickle to judge how teams have gone in T20 World Cups due to the fickle nature of T20 cricket and that there's a tournament every 2 years.
But you can. That's bullshit. That's a cop-out.
No. But the argument that I would have is that the team of the 90s, early 2000s, if they had T20 World Cups every 2 years, would they have won every single T20 World Cup every 2 years?
Probably.
I don't think they would. I think there would have been enough individual.
Anyway, what's the point?
Well, the point is that the Australian player, the media now, the commentators now didn't play in this current sort of framework of what cricket is in 2024. Do they need to kind of revisit their perspective, knowing that they haven't really played cricket in the framework that it currently is? I think I'm normally pro players when it comes to this, and I can completely understand where the media and the commentators have come from in their arguments. I think it's actually funny. It's kind of ironic that I've just spoken about this for like 5 minutes, and I think that, to be honest, I think it's a bit of a storm in a teacup, and I think the problem's probably not as big as what both sides.
Damian, what do you think?
No, look, I think in regards to the ex-players, I don't know if they'll realistically. It's like a lot of people in society. I think it's hard for a lot of people of a certain generation to understand this whole brand image thing that we see in sport now. But it is a reality, It's what Gen Z consume. So I just don't think many of them are going to be realistically overly sympathetic to that, because they don't understand it, and I think they're going to struggle to understand it. I struggle to understand, and I'm only 29, so it's.
But don't you think it's the bro code? That's what I think. I think it's such a childish thought from this current Australian team that because Brendan Julian or because Tim Payne, because they're part of the Baggy Green Club, they should be nice to us. They should go easy on us. That's what I think it's about. Like, I think they can take it from idiots like me that have never played. They can take it from journos, but when they see one of their, as they perceive their own, making comments in the media, they arc up. And I think it's an immature approach from this current group that get their nose out of joint when ex-players go at them, rather than actually listening to the ex-players and thinking these guys are bloody been around for a long time. They probably know what they're talking about.
But surely we have this much consumption of media now that, I don't know, am I being simplistic, Daniel, in saying, well, if you can't take any type of criticism, well, and I suppose you're only human as well. I mean, it does take a chip out of you a little bit each time.
Well, you've got to take it. You're right.
But sure, when you're not informed. Like, when you're not playing. Marnus Labuschagne doesn't need to know that he's on test notice right now, because, I mean, he's made like 6 out of his last 7 test scores have been under 10. I think he knows better than anyone how he's going. I don't think he needs perspective from anyone else. I did find it, just a little bit strange, like looking at it from the players' point of view. Like, they've been pretty successful over the last 3 years. I don't really know what they've been listening to, if they think that they've been dumped on all the time. Like, they've won everything. I mean, outside of like 2 not great T20 World Cup campaigns where, the bounce of the ball probably, if it went another way, they might have.
It's not making excuses. They didn't make the semi-finals. They didn't even get close. Anyway, but I agree with you saying. They've been broadly successful, and since things were pretty hot when Justin Langer was ousted, things have cooled off a bit. For example, if Brendan Julian says, "I don't think the fielding was good enough in the last T20 World Cup," and the players get upset about that, well, no one's saying. I never hear anybody in the media saying these people aren't trying or anything like that. No one ever questions their attitude. And, you go back to the 80s and 90s, the media was certainly questioning a lot of the players' attitudes back then. It's never in question now. So I just think it does this group of players who are so well paid, who are so well looked after, who are given series off to rest, fully paid for. Like, Cummins has taken this series off against England. It's not like he's getting docked his money for deciding to have a rest, So it just doesn't look good.
I think, would we be criticising them, or would the commentators be criticising Australia's players if they didn't think that they could do better? I mean, it's not like we're criticising Mongolia for getting bowled out for 10 because we know that's probably the level that they're at. I think that the criticism comes from a good place of knowing that, okay, a team might not have reached the expectations that they might have had.
But also, if Tim Payne goes on the radio and says, I'm not sure if Cummins is in our best T20 side, and then Cummins start messaging Payne going, oh, what, so you want me dropped now? Excuse me. Cummins should be smart enough to know that Tim Payne's got to say something on the radio. Like, it's just the way it works. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting.
It's always the way, isn't it, though? Players don't really understand the media's point of view until they're in the media, and then they're like, oh, okay, I can understand where they're coming from now. But it's always happened. Remember Ian Chappell and Steve Waugh? They had a long-running sort of feud between each other because Chappelli used to bag him and call him selfish and all that sort of stuff. So there's always been dispute.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a final break. Then we'll come back with some news out of England and can't let it go. You are listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. I'm with Daniel and Damian. And since our last episode, Sri Lanka have beaten England for the first time in a test match in 10 years. It was a great way for Sri Lanka to finish their tour. Although they lost the series 2-1, it was a terrible defeat for England and a famous win for Sri Lanka off the bat of Nissanka, who scored a brilliant century. Michael Vaughan wrote in the wake of this defeat, I felt that England disrespected Test cricket and disrespected Sri Lanka in the third Test by being overly aggressive with the bat and in their field placings. There is no way they will get away with playing like this against India or Australia. The intensity and concentration in the big moments were missing this week. It was all a bit flimsy, cocky even, from the words of former England captain Michael Vaughan. He also says they took the mickey out of the game. Thoughts,
Strong
gentlemen?
words. I tend to think they were a little bit complacent watching it. Maybe that's a bit of a harsh statement to make, but I think they felt, it's a dead rubber. They made 325 in the first.
I think they were 3 for 260.
Players.
Yeah, they were 3 for 260 and all out for 320. They should have got a massive first innings score.
Off the pedal. Yeah, and you can't. He's right. You can't afford to do that against some of the. Well, you couldn't afford to do it against Sri Lanka because they got beaten. So you can't afford to do that against the bigger teams, the more consistent teams out there. And if it starts to play into their heads, well, you don't want those habits to become almost part of the psyche going forward. I don't think it will, but I actually don't mind Vaughan having a say because it shows he's passionate and he cares.
Good on him.
And they need a bit of a kick up the backside after a loss like that. They need to feel pain playing for their country to lose like that. It's got to care.
Absolutely. And then since the last episode, I think we just missed it in the last episode. Brendan McCullum was appointed to coach both formats for England now. So, all three formats. He will take over the white ball teams early next year. And I actually watched his whole press conference where he was announced, and boy, did the English journos love him. Oh, Baz. Like, they just love him so much. Not one tough question. But, a couple of things jumped out at me that Baz said that, he's really good mates with Ben Stokes now, and he's been really good mates with Joss Buttler for a while, and that he felt, Buttler wasn't enjoying his cricket enough in the last couple of years. It seemed to be weighing him down. And you have to say, whether it's worked or not, Baz has lightened the English Test side up. They're a lot freer. They don't play with the sort of nerves and, I guess, trepidation that have plagued so many English teams. So I guess, Daniel, do you think Brendan can take that into the white ball sides and free them up again, like we saw in, say, the 2019 World Cup?
It should be a pretty good marriage, really, if we were to kind of take his philosophy on cricket and then apply it to white ball stuff for England. I think looking at the England white ball team over the last 2 years and 2 global events, I think we could probably agree that they were a little bit stale at both the T20 World Cup and the Cricket World Cup. Not that we were complaining too much, but I think they definitely needed somewhat of an evolution. I think we talked about Matthew Mott and maybe he didn't quite get the chance to really flourish in that situation.
Scapegoat.
But it sounds like that they're bought into what Baz is bringing to Test cricket, and I mean, there's enough sort of, let's call it, natural ability there for it to flourish. I can't see why it wouldn't. It's kind of scary if they sort of put the pieces together and get it right, how good they can be. But in saying that, there's quite a bit of competition across, the white ball formats for being the best in the world at the moment. So it's not going to be easy. But I think for England, they'll enjoy having the same focus with one person leading the team from all three points of view, all three formats.
What do you think, Damian?
Yeah, I think it'll be good. So the one, I guess, complicating point when you have different coaches in different formats, I know you've got to tailor your game plan differently because the format's different, but I guess from a philosophical point of view, if you hear different messaging, sometimes it can make it a little bit complex. I know there are different players sometimes that make, that are part of the makeup of the shorter formats, but I think sometimes having one streamlined voice isn't necessarily a bad thing, because at least, the mindset, the basics don't change amongst the players, even though you got to.
Yeah, it's a one message across all the teams and
one culture. I don't necessarily like that.
No, I'd agree with that. In the press conference that I was, thinking about Baz. So he lives in Queensland. He's quite good mates with a lot of people within Australian cricket due to his time at the Brisbane Heat. There's quite a few players who own racehorses with him and stuff.
So he loves his place.
Yeah. And he when Phil Hughes tragically passed away, it really changed his perspective on cricket, and it's almost the genesis of Bazball. After that, he realised that cricket was just so not important. He was just going to go out there and have a good time, and that sort of was the birth of this new way he approaches both as a player and as a coach, the way he played cricket. I find it hard to reconcile that person I saw in the press conference, the lovely, the messaging that he delivers, that's clearly working in some sense, with the guy that last year at Lords, as soon as the tide turned and Australia went 2-0 down in the Ashes, he starts pissing and moaning about the spirit of Australian cricket, and Australian cricket who's done so much for him. He starts saying, I'm not going to have a beer with these blokes. Like, I like him, but
contrived for the rivalry though, Mendez.
No, he was a prick at the Lords. He was poor behaviour. He turned the crowds against Australia. And it's someone who preaches all this, positivity and you should be the way you approach the game, and it's just the game. Then as soon as it doesn't go his way, he starts pissing and moaning and saying, I'm not going to have a beer with you. I just find it hard to reconcile those two people that I've seen. And, maybe he was exposed in the heat of the Ashes, but, I'd like him to get down on his knees and fucking apologise to Australia. That's what I want. When he gets here for the Ashes, that first day, get down on your hands and knees, kiss the ground and apologise for what he did, and then all will be forgiven.
That'll never happen, This
is
anyway,
very
nothing to say. I just want to put it out there. That's my Brendan McCullum. I found a photo of me the first ever time I got press coverage. I went in with Paul Dennett, and Brendan McCullum was in there commentating, and I got a photo with him. And it was before things turned sour. Anyway,
do you think he's a touch duplicitous? Do you?
Well, I just think it's really easy to go to be this guy that, is free and easy and preaching positivity and everyone should be happy. But then when you're in the heat of an Ashes and you 2-0 down to your bitter rival Australia, you turn to messaging, we're not going to have a beer with them. And they stuck to that. I'll give them credit. They didn't have a beer with Australia, So I just find those, what I've heard about Brendan is all good. As I said, people own racehorses with him. Everyone talks about him being a good bloke. Chris Lynn says great things about him. But, anyway, that's it. Let's move on. Just before we get into Can't Let It Go, Daniel, I'll let you take this one. An absolute disaster in India. Afghanistan hosting New Zealand in a test. I haven't seen the current status. Has the match been so they were supposed to play one-off test, and there's been 3 days of sunshine and 3 days cancelled because the ground wasn't fit enough.
They called off day 3, I think, before play was even scheduled to begin. That's how bad it is in Greater Noida. Like, the ground is so soft that I could just jump in and bury myself in it right now after having to go through 3 days of no cricket. I've done a little bit of digging into this, and it looks as though it's not on the field of play, thankfully. It looks as though this one's on the Afghanistan Cricket Board. Actually, the Uttar Pradesh Cricket Association and that Greater Noida ground, that ground had actually been banned by the BCCI, and whoever runs it, the organisation that runs it, had been banned by the BCCI for running matches that were match fixed from some corporate competition like 6 or 7 years ago. And so its funding had kind of been swallowed up and put to someone else. And Afghanistan even went and sort of their requests for a ground in India kind of fell on deaf ears. A couple of the other grounds, I think, were booked up with Ranji Trophy or domestic cricket. And they were given this ground and they didn't really do their due diligence and didn't work out that it was unfit for play. So I feel the biggest victims in all this is New Zealand, who miss out on a test match and their tour is curtailed because let's remember they've got to go to Sri Lanka basically straight after this. So there's not a whole lot to do in the Greater Noida and Delhi area, I've got to say, as someone who has been to Delhi. It's not my favorite Indian city. I'll tell you that for free. There's not a whole lot going on there. They might see the Red Fort and that's about it on their day off or their 3 days off. But yeah, it's not great for everyone involved. And there's got to be questions that are asked about this. I don't really know what happens next. And Damo, I don't know what you're doing when you're playing the rain card, but it's a good day to go out and hang out with your mates in the Indian sunshine, I think.
If you look at this in isolation as a farcical moment, would this be the most farcical situation since the Sabina Park Test match?
Yes.
It have to be.
Yeah.
And it's a black eye for Test cricket. This is not good enough. Test cricket is the pinnacle of the game. These are Test playing nations, and I don't know how it's. I think Daniel paints a pretty good picture of Afghanistan, not playing Test cricket at home, and therefore being sort of caught short here. But the whole thing is a disaster, and this is where the ICC needs to come down pretty hard and just make sure this doesn't happen again. Find out who's responsible and hold them to account. If it's someone from the Afghanistan Cricket Board who didn't check it out, then fire them.
The only caveat I will add is that this might have been dependent on what the funding towards the ACB was on a yearly front, and them looking to cut costs, maybe thinking they can get away with hosting a test match at a ground that's sort of desperate for action and probably willing to do it on the cheap. Because, I mean, a lot of the Afghan guys are actually based in UAE now, so you would think that UAE would be kind of a more viable location for Test cricket. But then to front up the cost and hold the Test match in Abu Dhabi or Sharjah or Dubai, I'm assuming costs the ACB quite a lot of money. So I suppose the question goes back on, say, the funding model and Test cricket and all of that. But either way, I mean, there's got to be a solution. This can't happen in the framework that we're in. And Test cricket is already, like, let's be honest with ourselves, like, it's not in the healthiest spot at the moment. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people probably think. But if this is going to happen like this again, then, people are going to sort of wallow around in sadness thinking, what's the future of the game, especially outside of World Test Championship as well, because this is obviously not a World Test Championship series as well.
All right, that is it for all the cricket news. Let's wrap up this episode with Can't Let It Go, that little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to the keeper. I think almost every headline tonight could have made Can't Let It Go for me. Yeah. Damian, you can open the batting on this one.
Yeah, one that caught my eye, Menas, that I can't let go. Did you hear that Essex have been docked 12 points in county cricket because they found
county?
Ferozi Kushi's bat too wide, and Keith Fletcher, the president, not very happy, saying the English Cricket Board is stupid. I think Essex beat Nottinghamshire in that match by 254 runs, but the umpires found that Kushi's bat, he's the opening batsman, obviously, was too wide. So I can't recall, maybe I could be forgetting something obvious, but I can't recall an instance where that's taken place, and such a penalty as well.
Apparently, it happens a bit more than you'd think at international and franchise level.
Oh.
Umpires will go into dressing rooms and check certain players' bats. It's usually done sort of quietly before a game, maybe.
Have they been docked? Has anyone been docked 12 points as a side?
No, but that's incredible.
Yeah.
I can tell you they do this at sub-regionals as well, because we were just waiting to go with a game. I can't remember who it was. One of the Cook Islanders boys had their bat checked by Kent Hannon with the gizmo. You've got to get it within the. They kind of put it over the top and just make sure that the bat kind of goes all the way through this, whatever the dimensions are. And yeah, he looked at it. Apparently, he looked at it suspiciously, but it sort of just pushed through, just made the requirement. So it happens more than you think.
Yeah,
There you go.
good one. Yeah, and I think, I think deserved. I'd like to know how much bigger it was. Like, are we talking a couple of millimeters? Are we talking? But I think you've got to police these things.
Did they ever measure Lance Kansas' Excalibur bat in the 80s, Menners, when he hit a one-handed six in a one-day to the longest part of the MCG boundary? Because I'd like to get a measurement of that.
Daniel, what's your can't let it go?
Didn't really have one for this week, but to add, Jacob Bethel for England. He's in the England squad for the Australia series. Look out for him. He grew up in Barbados, and if you listen to him, he played in the 19s World Cup. I'm not sure if it was the last one or the one before, but really good player and has a killer Bayesian accent as well. He's a joy to watch. Look out for him. He's good.
It's a good pick. He played Sydney Grey cricket here a couple of years ago and I commentated on him a few times. And he was a lovely timer of the ball, even back then, quite diminutive, but he's filled out a bit. All right, my can't let it go. I've got two really quick ones. First one is a good news story. Rishabh Pant is back in the Indian Test squad for the first time since December 2022 and that horrible car accident. He's there to play against Bangladesh, and that's an indication that we'll see him here for the Border Gavaskar Trophy. So terrific news there. And the other can't let it go is Marnus Labuschagne, who we mentioned earlier, has been done for dissent in a grade game. He was playing in a domestic T20 tournament in Brisbane, the Max T20, and he was unhappy at a catch that was taken being given not out, and showed considerable dissent towards the umpire. He can't be suspended from international cricket, but he has been just appointed Queensland captain, so this is not a good look. And Marnus again just letting his passion for the game overtake him.
Well, it's not good for kids. You know, I know it hasn't probably been widely publicised, but it's not.
Well, it was on TV. It was on KO, so you're right.
Yeah, I know, but I guess maybe because it's off Broadway and because it's not, we're in the middle of footy finals, it didn't get the attention that it probably would have had a month later. But yeah, you're right. It's not good when you got kids tuning in. You don't want that at junior level. Not
at all. Anyway, that's it for Cricket Unfiltered this week. Enjoy the games versus England. I've also got some great news. So with the podcast, firstly, obviously, if you want an ad-free version, that's available on the Patreon feed. The Mad Men's weekly podcast column is coming. So starting this week, I'm going to be doing a solo episode every week with just me getting a couple of issues off my chest with international cricket or any cricket, in fact. So look out for those extra releases, the Mad Menners. They're not going to be mad. Some are going to be measured Mad Menners, but I'm going to go with the branding. The Mad Menners branding's worked. So, there's going to be an extra show a week during the season with my take on a particular issue. Damian, what are you up to over the next week?
Commentating a bit of the under-18s finals in the Australian rules. They change sponsors every year. It used to be the TAC Cup, but it's the Coach Talent League. So looking forward to the back end of footy finals, man, as AFL and NRL. I'm hoping the Storm can go all the way. And I wouldn't mind seeing Hawthorn actually win the flag this year. They've been the entertaining side in the comp in the AFL.
All that means to me, footy finals, is cricket's right behind it. Daniel, what's up with you over the next week? Where can listeners find the Emerging Cricket Podcast?
Yeah, we'll drop a new episode likely in the coming days. But apart from that, pretty quiet, just building up towards the T20 Women's World Cup, which begins early next month in UAE. And the Swanee's still alive and Manly's still alive. So on that front, there's enough enough footy to watch on the pitch.
you covering?
Are you going to the T20 World Cup?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'll be at home for this one, which is a little bit disappointing. But yeah, looking forward to it in a decent time slot for a sort of prime time. Although I think the games might go a little bit late into the night for us, so gonna be some late nights, I think.
Indeed. All right, listeners. Well, thanks for tuning in to Cricket Unfiltered. We'll be back next week.